Hey friends, it's Dawn with TwiceShearedSheep.com, and we're going to try something a little bit different today. Today I'm going to talk to you about my recipe on how to create beautiful and dynamic flatlays, specifically for yarn. Because flatlays tend to be the majority of our marketing materials when we have yarn, either that or, photographs of finished projects that you can do with your yarn, or if you sell patterns, that's kind of a little bit different. But if you sell yarn or fiber in specific, flatlays are going to be your best friend. And remember, this is simply a photograph that's taken directly from above so that everything is laid out flat in front of you and arranged just so. Now, I'm going to switch over to my Photoshop so that I can draw for you and give you what my recipe is. And these are mix and match, so here we go. All right, so our first element, our first piece of our recipe that we can do is parallel lines. I want you to think about your frame of your photograph as being some of your lines. Ooh, that was not a particularly straight line. So these are your straight lines that you automatically have. These are the square frame of your photograph. Or if you're doing a slider for your website or an ad on Facebook, it may not be square, it may be a longer rectangle. But these lines are part of your frame. Now, when I say parallel lines, it means that you can take objects and lay them out so that they are running parallel to each other or parallel to the lines of your frame. So this can be vertically or it can be horizontally, whichever. But they can be parallel to each other, or they can be parallel to the outside lines. So I can also do a 45-degree angle. So this is number 2. You can do an angle, specifically a 45-degree angle to your lines of your frame. And this is a very dynamic sort of photo. You see a lot of things that are on an angle. And if you want to, you can add parallel lines in addition to your 45-degree angle. So number 1 was parallel lines. Number 2 is angles, specifically a 45-degree angle, but less angles are also good. Number 3 is right angles. So right here on the frame, we've got a right angle. In order to lay things out, you may decide that you want to lay one thing like this, and then you're going to lay another thing at a 90-degree angle to it. In particular, if you take one thing over here, and you can take 2 smaller things over here, that creates a rather dynamic shape because it creates a sort of symmetry right here where these 2 objects together almost form a parallel line with this object over here, but they're in kind of a 45-degree angle. I'm sorry, they're in a 90-degree angle to the original object. You can also lay a long skinny thing like this and then parallel lines of long skinny things over here, and that's a beautiful dynamic. Okay, so that was number 3. So we had parallel lines, we had angles, 45 degrees or other, and we have 90 degrees. Number 4 is circles. Particularly if you take a circle directly in the center of your frame. It creates a very nice dynamic photo. A bowl full of yarn or a beautiful cake of yarn looks gorgeous like that. Again, we can combine these, so we can do circles in parallel lines. That forms a very dynamic sort of photograph. We can do circles in lines at an angle to the frame, and that also creates an interesting dynamic. So any combination that you want to do of, we can do some straight lines, some parallel lines, and then a circle over here creates an interesting dynamic. We can do some diagonal lines and a circle, and this will create an interesting dynamic. Any combination that you want to do of those will be a beautiful, interesting dynamic. Okay, number 4, no, we're on number 5, is triangles. Objects in general tend to look better in odd numbers. So having 1 object or 3 objects or 5 objects. 3 objects happens to form kind of a triangle. So you can have 1 object here, and then maybe we've got another object here in, a long angled object. And then we're going to put a 3rd object right here so that we form a triangle of objects. So anytime that you're laying them out on your screen, think about creating that triangle. Okay, so that was number 5, number 6. I lost track. Okay, next one is repeat sameness. When you repeat an object that looks similar over and over and over again, it creates a very interesting dynamic. It reinforces that idea. So if you've got 5 skeins of the same color right next to each other, it can be very beautiful. If you want to, you can even stagger the ends of those so that they form a triangle. Ooh. So repeating sameness. This can be in circles, it can be in squares, it can be in parallel lines, objects that look similar. So all skeins of the same size, all circles that are the same size. All of that works beautifully. Okay, and the last thing, if we're repeating sameness, we can also juxtapose opposites. So opposites doesn't have to be exactly opposite. It doesn't have to be black and white. It can be something that is very smooth and long, like a skein of yarn. And then over here, you've got a sprig of leafy floweriness. So we're combining 2 things here. We've got parallel lines. We've got this and this are right next to each other and kind of like a parallel line. But then we've got something that is very soft and kind of long, and then something that's kind of spiky over here. And so those are different things. That creates the idea of opposites. Another way that we can juxtapose opposites is we can take something that is very large, like a knitted garment in the center of our screen, and then we're going to juxtapose that with very small objects surrounding it. So maybe some little tiny snippet balls of yarn around it, maybe a tiny pair of scissors over here, something that is kind of in opposition to it. Another idea for opposites is to take something that is very flowy, like, you know, some loose yarn over here, and juxtapose it with a very tightly controlled ball of yarn, or a hank of yarn, or something that's wound up. This would be even better if we repeat the two to create some balance. Oh, now that looks like we've made a face. But I hope this gets your ideas flowing. Okay, again, so the things that we're thinking about are, number 1, parallel lines. Number 2, angles, specifically 45-degree angles or slightly less than 45-degree angles. Number 3 is a 90-degree angle, two objects that are directly opposite direction from each other. And remember, your outline here of your frame is also part of that picture. So if you've got objects that are at a 90-degree angle to that frame, that counts. Number 4 is circles, whether that be coffee rings on your background, or a ring of your knitting needles inside a hat that you're knitting, or a round ball of yarn. All of that counts as a circle. Or taking other objects and forming a circle out of them. Number 5 is triangles. Use your objects to create triangles. So a large object and 2 smaller objects, 3 equally sized objects, all can form a triangle on your screen. Number 6 is to repeat sameness, and number 7 is to juxtapose differences.